This might be one of the most negative reviews I've ever done, and 5 reasons why I do not recommend the Cadex Ascent VRX. Find out, is cheap digital FPV all it's cracked up to be, or should you spend a little bit more and get a different system? G'day, Stu from UAV Futures here, and look, you might need to call an ambulance, not for me, but for the Cadex Ascent VRX, because we have some bad news about this. We're going to break it down. I'm going to show you the text and the specs. We're going to go for some flights, but I'm going to talk about the headaches that I have with this and why, for anybody getting in, I just do not recommend it. Now, look, Cadex is not going to like me saying this. That doesn't mean that it is all bad. There is an edge case where I say, hey, these users probably will really like this system, but for everybody else who wants cheap digital, put in a VRX and able to feed it into our goggles, I am feeling disappointed. So we're going to go through my experiences with this system, talk about the text and the specs as a bit of an overview. I'm going to put the stats on the screen, like 1080p, we've got 100 frames per second, we've got DVR in here, it's got like all your little menu options. It's very, very similar if you're used to flying around with a system like the traditional Walksnail system. And a big one, look, and I'll put it on the screen, it is a pretty budget price to get all of this, but budget doesn't always mean that it is worth it, and I'm going to explain why. So in a moment, we're just about to go out for a little flight, but I have some things which I absolutely cannot understand why they have done this. This is a module. It goes on the front, just like here. I think of this as my HD0 module. You can put that on the front of your goggles, but this one, how are you meant to mount this thing? It is an absolute nightmare to try to mount this. Underneath, yes, you do have like this little traditional tripod screw, but you can't actually screw it in very well because you've got your HDMI on one side, you've got your power cord on one side. So unless you have a specific cable, and don't even get me started on cables. I don't know who was in charge of that, but they're going to get in trouble after watching this video because you just can't mount this thing easily. And then you are tethered to this, you can't move around easy. I did not like mounting this. It was a nightmare no matter how I tried to fly around and connect this up to my goggles. But surely, how are you meant to connect that? Surely they give you some cables that just simply plug in there. Well, that would be nice because you do get this cable right here, which is a HDMI cable. It goes right here. It has the HDMI feed from your Ascent VRX. And then, of course, what is Cadex's flagship goggle? Well, I've got one right here. This is the Goggle X. Do you think that this is easy to connect up? Absolutely not. This cable does not fit into the bottom of the goggles that we've got right here. So the cable that Cadex gives you, you need to go out and find another one. Now, luckily, I can't believe this, I actually found the correct adapter from RunCam of all people when I was looking at one of their open IPC links. So you're going to see me using this cable. I don't know why Cadex couldn't just do a bit of research and think, hey, you know our flagship product, maybe we should make our new product work with that. All it takes is a cable. No, they gave you this piece of junk right here, which is not going to be helpful to anybody. The other part as well, you get this little power cable, and that is to let you connect it up so you can simply power both of your things at once. And this wouldn't be too much of a problem, except there's no way to easily mount this at all. It doesn't have any traditional plug. You do get, where are they? You get these little pieces of plastic or like rubber stickies. They're meant to help some people. There's no way to stick this on here. And if you think, oh, well, I will mount it to a tripod somehow, well, you can't get very far. You have to stand right next to your tripod when your battery cable is only this long. So this, Cadex, if you're watching as well, whoever's in charge of cables, needs to be like 4 foot long. And please have 2 cables running off that are both 4 foot long. That would make this a much better solution than whatever we've got here. The cables, absolutely disgusting, but it gets even better. You would think, right? I've just bought a new Cadex VRX. I've just bought some new Ascent Lite compatible VTXs. They're going to work together? No, you need to make sure that you update both of these because for some reason, they're not going to work until you update both of them. Updating the Ascent Lite VTX in here was actually a bit of a breeze. I was pleasantly surprised. So A+, whoever did that app, there's no nonsense. It's just like click a button, took about 20 seconds, and that was done. So that was no problem. The VRX, you update that by putting an SD card in here, holding the link button for about 8 seconds. It'll go through and do its thing. Mine actually froze halfway through that. I don't know what the issue was. I left it for about 10 minutes, came back, it was still stuck on a completely white screen, unplugged it, and then turned it back on, fingers crossed, and it seemed to have worked. Now, in a moment, we're going to go for a flight, but check out how loud this is as well. This is the loudest VTX you have ever heard, so it does a bit of a beep on startup. I'm going to hold it near my microphone right here, and I hope that this comes through because it's ridiculous. So, maybe. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. So, actually sounds like I'm using a hairdryer right here. I've turned on the air conditioner, so it's extremely loud as well. It is far louder than any other goggle or any other VRX that I've ever tested. But let's go for a flight, and you're going to see me. I had to test this with a few different sets of goggles because I flew around with these ones right here, the Goggles X. You would think that this is who Cadex would want them to work with. I had some issues. You're going to see me flying around with SkyZones. I'm not even going to get into latency about the O4 Pros. That's for another day and for some other angry people. And then I do need to talk about the Ascent Light goggles that they have right here, because there might be some light at the end of the tunnel. So let's go look at the flight footage, and yeah, it's going to be juddery. You let me know what you think, and then we'll come back here and we will finish the autopsy of the Walksnail Ascent VRX. So let's check it out in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so here we go. So you can see actually two flights right now, because the first one I'm using the Cadex X goggles, and then you're going to see me switch over to my SkyZones. And that's for a reason, because it got a little bit sketchy actually. Now flying around, looking at the image quality and everything, I feel like the Ascent VTX and the Ascent system looks really good when the image is still, but when you are moving, a couple of these details tend to blend together. Look, it doesn't have to be perfect because it is a $35 VTX and a really cheap VRX, but when I'm flying this around too, I have my head mounted sideways, or I guess it's mounted sideways on my head, trying to put it up there. But also right there, I lost video for that. So something is going on in the link between my Goggles X, and I just didn't have any confidence. But let's try it around now with my SkyZone goggles. Ready? So here we go with take 2, and this one is different because I'm using my SkyZones and I'm standing sideways, so my VRX is on the side of my head, so I'm getting the best like antenna reception and everything over here. Then that's because there is no real nice way to put this either on a ground station, on your head. I know I keep going on about it, but it is not easy to do it. I felt like the VRX was going to fall over. That's going to result in some bad images, like low reception, all that sort of stuff. The way that this is mounted in cables, like 0 out of 10. I do not like that at all. And then let's talk about the actual video. So this is very similar to the Ascent Protoss that I tested, although this is on the later firmware. I do notice, like, there is a little bit of juddering as it was sort of turning. The best way to describe it is like flicking through a really high-resolution flipbook, sort of seeing some of those images on those hard yaws and everything like that. And the other part, when you are cruising this around, it looks really good when the image is still, but in some fast motion, those fine details tend to blur together as well. So I think, like, if I just hit pause just here, we'll have a look at some of the trees in the distance. Some of these, it starts to blur together just a little bit. It's not terrible. But I don't think you can expect too much as well from like a $35 VRX and also a really, really cheap VTX and also a really, really cheap VRX. So here we go. I would say I had fun with this, but it's not my recommendation. This Ascent system is best when it is paired with the Ascent Light goggles. The VRX is in a really tricky spot where if you already have a set of goggles that has HDMI in, there's probably some other options out there. If you've got HD0 or if you've got Walksnail, just keep using those systems. It is trying to go after a market to get people in for cheap digital, but the way that it is going about it and the inability to easily incorporate it into a system, let alone their own system with some goggles, is just a bit of a nightmare. I will say though that the Lightning V2, like, it fits this quad beautifully, and I like that this VTX is actually the smallest one that we had. So you could have a lot of fun with this. It does need to fix the jitter and just the mounting. So here you can go, like, all those wires hanging off my head. It's never a good day. If it get much worse or is any light at the end of the tunnel, well, the Ascent VRX, I don't actually recommend this to very many pilots whatsoever, because if you already have a set of goggles like these right here, you're golden. Just stick to the Walksnail system. You don't need to jump over to the Ascent. And if you are thinking about jumping in and trying cheap digital, well, then you have to weigh this up against something like the Beta FPV P1 system, which performs much better. I really liked it. It felt much more stable and smooth versus the jitters that I kind of had when I was flying around with this. It almost felt like I was flipping through a page book sometime. It was sort of jumping around. It just was not a very pleasant flight experience. What's some good news? Well, this is where I would love to say that if you were flying this system around and you could get this feed on these Ascent Light goggles right here, I think that might be acceptable. It's still going to be a trade-off between jitterness and comfort. These goggles right here are really comfy. I do really like the Walksnail Ascent goggles, like these ones right here. I think they do a great job. However, in my testing, I cannot go back and rebind these up, because when I first got these, they were allowed to bind, and this is where I owe you an apology. These are on some very, very early firmware. I updated these VTXs to work with my Ascent VRX. Then they are no longer compatible with this. I need to update the firmware on these goggles. I'm not going to do that though. This firmware, it is extreme, like a very, very early prototype. I don't want to lose this. There's no way to go back to this. This is the only time when it would ever go black and white, do some strange behavior. So the firmware that is on these goggles is probably very, very limited in the world. Until I find a way to back that up, I don't want to lose having access to that early firmware. So if you have those goggles, you might still think about, hey, well, flying around, getting a $30 VTX, I think it's going to be okay. But for everybody else, it's not going to be great. Now, Cadex, if you are still watching, shout out to them, because I do think that they take feedback in the things we say. This is not trying to just bash on and hate Cadex. This is purely talking about this product, what they can do to improve. Number one, you need to get much better with your cables. Give us like 3 times as many cables, different sizes, so people who get this, they don't have to go out and source their own. But you need to, as a priority, get a cable that works between the Goggles X and this VRX. That should be fixed. You need to provide some way as well to mount this better, and that might mean, please, like, I can think of a solution here. Give us like a little TPU mount or something. You've already got these antenna placements right here. You might be able to have a flat plate, then they can stick that to. Provide us with a chest mount maybe, that this can hang here if people want to fly that way. And that also means you need to provide us with the correct power cable that's going to be powering this, and have enough room to get to our goggles. Or if you say this is for a tripod, that can go over there as well and bind to that. So look, I had better results flying this around on my Sky Zones, believe it or not, than on my Goggles X, which is crazy because this is the goggle we are supposed to use. I would have loved to test them on the HD Zero goggles, but I don't have those. And overall, I don't recommend the Cadex Ascent VRX.
Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Air 75 from Beta FPV. And unlike the Air 65, the 75 only comes in one particular configuration as far as race or freestyle. We have 2 receiver types, Express LRS or TBS Crossfire. Flight controller is the new Air G473 4-in-1. You'll note there that it comes with the receiver stacked on top rather than part of the receiver. Originally, in my Air 65 review, I thought they were going to be in the new 4-in-1 with everything built in on this one, but I was wrong. This was 0802 SE 23,000 kV motors, and on those motors are the Gemfan 40mm bi-bladed props. Camera is the CO3, which now ships with a piece of tape on the back to fix that problem where you might see some of the PCB shining through the lens. Flight controller does not have a USB port on it, but you do get this little dongle so you can connect it to USB-C, but you better make sure you keep track of this. Has the BT20 connector that is from Beta FPV, and it is I guess you'd call it a 190-degree angle. So you don't have to bend the wires, the connectors turn for you. As you can see here, no motor connectors, everything is soldered on. Really hard to see down in there, but that camera connector, that's smaller than we see on most of our nano cameras or micro cameras, so something to be aware of that you might have to, if you want to change cameras, splice this in. This canopy is also made for this particular size of lens. The battery tray on the bottom does fit all these batteries, but I did find with the WeBleed 450s and the Tiny Whoop 450s, that they're a little bit tighter. They don't slide in quite as neatly. They take a little bit of finagling, but not bad at all. Unfortunately, these just arrived today, so we won't see any flight footage with them. The accessories you get are very, very minimal. We get the dongle connector that I already talked about. You can see my spare props are nice and green. We also get a Beta FPV support card, so you can scan that QR code and go to their knowledge base. And that's it. No stickers. It weighs just a touch over 21 grams. With the older style Beta FPV 450, it weighs 33 and 3/4 grams. With the Weebleed FPV with the wire connector on it, weighs 32 and 3/4 grams. Pretty much the same with the Tiny Whoop with the lead on it. And with the Beta FPV Lava 450, it weighs 33.45 grams. And motor post to motor post, I'm getting just about 77 millimeters. Of course, we're going to start inside with the Air 75. I am using, as you see in the background, the Pyrodrome version of the Radiomaster Zorro that has the AG01 gimbals. That is my daily driver to this day. I haven't found a radio app over that one. As well as the HD0 goggles with the rapid fire immersion inside. And while I start off, 19 seconds in or whatever it was with the crash, it happens. Not every flight is crash free. I would say I still crash probably 40 or 50% of the time. Especially when I'm exploring my own skill set, whether that's pushing or taking new paths or trying something new when it comes to inside flight. We just have a smaller margin for error when we're flying inside. I should make it clear that I have a bias for micros. If you're not familiar with the channel, I pretty much only cover micro quads. That would be about 3.5 inch props and smaller. Although my strongest bias is for whoops. I do like whoops. I think that they're very, very fun. I also have a house that is laid out well for flying around inside. It's one of my bedtime routines is to fly generally 2 flights before I go to bed. It's kind of how I wrap up the day. Some people play solitaire. Maybe some people have a drink or something like that, or you have a show you finish your day with. I finish my day with a couple of whoop flights. The Air 75 does come with bi-blades. With the motors, you can definitely handle tri-blades if you prefer that. Do know that you may want to change the tune. I thought with the Air 75 that the tune wasn't quite as good as the Air 65. Now, probably by this point, if you watch many
Today I'm going to be comparing the Canex Ascent HD FPV video system versus the Beta FPV ArtLink HD FPV video system. Specifically, the image quality differences and penetration between the two. These are both budget HD FPV video systems, and in these tests, the Ascent comes with the ready-to-fly Protos package from Canex, and the ArtLink comes with the ready-to-fly Aquila 2 package from Beta FPV. I'm choosing an indoor location because the lighting is consistent and we have text on the walls, which is good for detail comparisons. The building is made of solid brick for the most part, also making it ideal for penetration testing, but I will show some outdoor footage as well. Starting off with the Ascent system in 1080p 60 fps, and the image is blurry when it comes to distant text. It's only when you fly closer that you can read the text. There's also a constant grain on the image, which is present when flying outdoors as well. I think this is caused by a sharpening filter set too high. You can't focus the camera any better. There's also sometimes a haloing artifact present as well in particular scenarios. ArtLink and Ascent are using very similar hardware, and while you can't read the text clearly with ArtLink either, it's a less blurred image in the DVR compared to Ascent. ArtLink is more blurred in the goggles than shown on the DVR due to a slight ghosting, perhaps caused by the lens array in the goggles. But despite ArtLink looking better image-wise in the DVR and slightly better through the goggles than Ascent, it's actually Ascent that looks closer to the naked eye in the sports hall. There's a lot of detail lost with ArtLink on the wood grain of the walls, for example. And while the focus of ArtLink is better in the center of the screen, there is a lot of blur and distortion on the outer edge of the image due to the wide-angle lens of the camera. Ascent seems to have slightly less of this when it comes to the wide-angle lens. Ascent also seems to have an out-of-control white balance. There's a lot of green colors on the image, which then quickly flashes through the entire color range constantly. This is something that can be corrected in firmware updates. Whether they do that or not is another thing, as it's something that I have seen with other Cadex cameras. Specifically, the Cadex Nebula Pro used to do this with the DJI Cadex Vista Lite. It seems that Link system has a much more stable white balance in comparison. Generally, with a good signal, ArtLink is smoother in the goggles compared to Ascent. Ascent has these slight stutters all of the time in 1080p. You can switch Ascent to 720p and the stutters don't seem as bad, but they are still there. It's not something that stops you flying and feels like it's adding latency, but you definitely notice it. On to penetration testing, and Ascent has the best low bitrate handling. There is plenty of warning when your video signal is getting low, identified by first a degrading overall image and then losing the size of the video like a more aggressive DJI focus mode. The current Ascent video transmitter has a max power of 100 milliwatts, which is very low power for digital FPV. And on the goggle side, the antennas are patch antennas, meaning that they have better range than the omnidirectional antennas found on the ArtLink goggles. But this requires some experience, because if you have your head pointed at the ground or in a different direction, the video feed will have next to no low signal warnings and your video will just freeze. In contrast, the ArtLink video transmitter is 200 milliwatts, so double the power of Ascent. But as power is not linear, it's not double the range. In fact, coupled up with the omnidirectional antennas on the ArtLink system, the range is almost the same as Ascent, with ArtLink choosing to keep the image quality of the entire image for much longer, but with the massive downside of just dropping frames and intermittent jerkiness and freezing of the image, to the point where there is no warning whatsoever when your range will run out. Now, watching back the DVR of both of these systems, ArtLink looks like it's outperforming Ascent, but in reality, the usable range of both is about the same. ArtLink looks better because the image doesn't seem to degrade anywhere near as much as Ascent does, but it actually needs to degrade to retain the stable link. And that's not something that you will see on this DVR footage. It's something you will feel through the sticks of the model as it becomes disconnected and laggy. I'm only able to keep the ArtLink model flying because it's a small model flying very slow in a controlled indoor environment. I would be extremely worried putting ArtLink on a fast 5-inch model where the quad could have moved many meters between the frames freezing. I think this is a huge problem for ArtLink at the moment. If this VTX was able to output 1 watt, I wouldn't be too concerned about the way it's handling low signal. But for now, the 200 milliwatt VTX is all we have, with no indication that there's going to be anything else coming, and it needs to have better low signal warnings than this if we were to use it on a bigger model. Outside, with a building between me and the quad, the results were the same, with Ascent going into focus mode around 120 meters away, and ArtLink doing its jerky freezing image thing at the same distance. I don't think the range of Ascent or ArtLink is surprising or amazing for what they are. For example, the analog Tiny Hawk Lite, which costs half the price of the Ascent-based Protoss and the ArtLink-based Beta FPV Aquila 2, has no problem retaining signal where the ArtLink and Ascent fails. Yes, the analog quad can output 400 milliwatts and the image is nowhere near as good, but it's $180 for this package compared to $359 for the other two. The same can be said for the now 7-year-old DJI O2 system, which you can't buy new anymore, but you can often pick it up for cheaper than these new systems second-hand. And there's not a single glitch with O2 around this brickwork. I can fly the entire complex without a single jitter, which is why, to this day, DJI O2 is still my favourite HD FPV system. And despite O2 only being 720p, I can read the text on the walls, where you can't with either of these 1080p budget systems. It does look like the entire room is blown out slightly with DJI O2, but it's actually just the great dynamic range of the camera that's causing that. I know I often go on about how DJI O2 is my favourite, and yet O3 and O4 can outperform it image-wise, but there are lots of reasons why O2 is better in my opinion. It can be picked up for really cheap, as I say. I think we picked up a set of goggles with an air unit for $100. Yes, they don't make it anymore, but for now it seems that it's not a struggle to get stuff second hand. The goggles are the comfiest out of any of the DJI goggles with the upgraded DJI foam. The screen is huge and immersive compared to the Goggles 2 and the Goggles 3. The camera is still the best for FPV in terms of dynamic range and low light, and I put that over O3 and O4 as well. You don't need a flight controller to get full power out of O2 either, which is good for FPV with planes and also RC cars. And I do think it's fair to now compare DJI O2 to these budget systems. You would expect with 7 years of development, ArtLink and Ascent would at least be able to match O2, but for now, they are not. ArtLink's bitrate readout seems to start at 21 megabit and then goes down to 16 megabit and never recovers back to 21. Then it goes down to 11 megabit, and then at 6 megabit is where you start getting the jerky video around about there, but it's not clear. You don't have numbers in between those steps, which is unusual. And you can't read the bitrate reading on the goggles anyway because the text is just too small. Ascent seems to work all the way down to 0.5 megabit. Now whether it's actually doing that is another question, but it's easier to see when you are losing your video signal because you lose the side of the video. You can't really see the bitrate reading any clearer, but what it does with the video feed is much more clearer than ArtLink. ArtLink gives you the unique option of being able to select the DVR bitrate from 8 megabits up to 24 megabits. Now, you actually can't change the bitrate of the video feed. That seems to be stuck with a maximum of 21 megabits. So for all of these flights so far, I've set the ArtLink's DVR to 24 megabit, and the Ascent's DVR is around 40 megabit. But given that ArtLink starts at around 21 megabit and then seems to drop to 16 megabit and never recovers to higher than that, the 24 megabit DVR is overkill. It comes with 8 megabit set as standard, and you can see a big drop off in the DVR quality when it's set to that. You can also set it to 16 megabit, which is probably the best setting from my testing. There is actually a slight difference in the FPV performance dropping the quality of the DVR, which is unusual. You get slightly less jerkiness at the end of its range setting the DVR to 8 megabit, but it's not by much. And the playback of the DVR in general on a computer needs to be re-encoded using Handbrake. It seems that there is some sort of codec issue, whereas the Cadex DVR seems to play back fine. There's no Betaflight OSD file created on the ArtLink goggles, whereas Cadex already have that covered and working, so you can use the sneaky FPV OSD tool to get the Betaflight overlay working on your videos. ArtLink still needs much better low signal handling to give you any kind of confidence in its range, unless you are flying in an open field and not flying behind any objects. For the moment, these budget video systems give me some concern. Cadex have Ascent, Beta FPV has ArtLink, and HLRC have announced their version of it. It's looking like, rather than before, where DJI had their system and Walksnail had Avatar, and the bind and fly manufacturers came out with a model that supported either of those or an analog version, we have a situation where each bind and fly manufacturer might have their own FPV HD video system. So if you want a Beta FPV bind and fly model, you have to get ArtLink gear. If you want an HLRC model, you have to get their system. So who's next? iFlight? Gap RC? I really hope it doesn't come to this, because if history tells us anything, FPV thrives when we are all on the same page. It's a niche hobby in the first place, so for us to be divided over different systems is not a good thing for it. This hobby was at its peak of popularity when all we had for a video system was analog, and that's not because it was the best. The same goes for the control system. For the most part, we are using Express LRS because it's cheap, open source, and has a solid development path with no close competitor, certainly price-wise. And the same can be said for Betaflight. But giving newbies multiple video systems that perform very similar causes confusion for beginners specifically and division amongst hobbyists. I really do hope one of these cheap video systems becomes the Express LRS of the video system world, which would solve the problem. But what we have is an increasing number of similar performing systems on the horizon. If I were to rank these video systems, all I can say is that DJI is still by far the best. I know around the world that is not the option for anyone, but here I would put O2 first for the FPV experience and the second-hand price of it, then O4 and O3, with O4 having the best range and onboard recording capability, and O3 having the best goggle compatibility. O3 works with the Goggles 2, the Goggles 3, but more importantly, the V2 goggles, which are my personal favourite. Then after that would be Walksnail Avatar, with its more powerful VTXs and multiple onboard recording options, and then these two budget options. And it's actually difficult to put those in order because it depends what you favour. Do you want a slightly better image quality but bad low signal handling? Or do you want an image that's not quite as good but it degrades in a way that you can understand and know where the limit is? And also, Cadex is a dedicated FPV video system company. They have previous of releasing a pretty useless Avatar HD FPV video system and over time making it usable. Beta FPV don't have the history of that yet. Then you can say Cadex have released the standalone VRX for Ascent at the cost of about 70 quid. You will need to attach goggles to that, and a decent pair of goggles could cost you $200 to $300, at which point the Avatar V1 and the Goggles X is that price anyway, with better VTX and camera options. Beta FPV ArtLink has no current plans for a standalone VRX that I'm aware of, or a more powerful video transmitter. But again, if they release the VRX, just like Ascent, you would have to add the price of a pair of decent goggles onto that. And if they do release a cost-effective, more powerful VTX, your only saving is in the VTX. And for some people, I can see that being important, but it needs to perform as good as the alternatives. The reality is, if both of these budget goggles from Cadex FPV and Beta FPV were good enough, then the budget package makes a lot of sense. And that's the problem. The goggles are very uncomfortable to wear, and you don't get a great image through them. So people are talking about, I hope they release a VRX, at which point the price point goes up. So there you go, that's my comparison between ArtLink and Ascent. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, cheers. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Emax Tiny Hawk Lite Analog Ready to Fly package. There's been a lot of these types of packages lately, but this one is actually budget enough to buy for $180 and not lose too much when you are ready to upgrade. First we have the Quad, which has brushed motors to keep the cost down, along with an analog VTX with up to 400 milliwatts of power. Then we have a spare 750 mAh 1S battery with Emax's own connector. You're given 3 batteries in total. Then we have a spare set of AVAN props, and we have a bracket to connect the detachable FPV screen to the controller. You are given a USB Type-C cable, a simple USB LiPo charger, some tools and spares, and a second USB micro cable to charge the FPV goggles/monitor. Then we have Emax's Express LRS based E8 transmitter. The controls are labelled, which is really helpful for a beginner. So we have an arming and disarming switch, The model doesn't have flip over after crash or a beeper installed. These switches are for use with another one of their products. As this is a Betaflight based quad, we have angle mode, horizon mode and acro mode. The transmitter has a DSC trainer port, and it can also be used with a simulator via the USB Type-C connector, which also charges the included 18650 battery. You can also mod an external antenna if you wish. Then we have a bunch of stickers and cards, and we have the Analog Transporter 2 box goggles. You are given some spare Emax connectors. I personally don't like bespoke connectors because it either means that you have to mod other batteries, which isn't easy or safe to do for a beginner, or buy spare batteries from Emax. The goggles are really basic, but this package is aggressively priced. It's essentially a 4.3-inch monitor with a built-in analog receiver that detaches via magnets from the goggles for those who want to attach the screen to the transmitter. I actually think this is a better option than using the goggles, as the cheap Fresnel lens in the goggles is really straining on the eyes, despite you being able to lengthen the distance of them. The monitor has a built-in 1300 mAh battery. Crucially, the monitor does not have a built-in DVR, so you can't record your FPV feed. On the side of the monitor, we have a power/menu button and an automatic channel search button. And on the other side, we have B and C buttons to move the channels manually up and down. With the antennas attached to the monitor, a quick power up of everything, and it's all working. It just all needs charging. We have a few menu options, but sadly there's no way to switch the 16:9 aspect ratio to the native 4:3 of the camera. But it can be flown fine like this. The image is just stretched slightly horizontally. The quad is really nice, sort of a flashback to the old days where we didn't have tiny brushless motors. Its all-in-one flight controller is flashed with Betaflight, and it has a modern USB Type-C connector. I wouldn't recommend tweaking anything in Betaflight for a beginner, but the fact that you can is great. The camera is the Runcam 3 Nano, and the VTX is switchable from 25mW up to 400mW, which is double that of the Beta FPV ArtLink system found in the Aquila 2, and 4 times more than the Ascent system found in the Cadex Protoss. Despite the name, it's not light in weight, it's only light in price. With a battery, it weighs 53.7 grams and 36.5 grams without a battery. The biggest problem with brushed motors is that they don't do well with heavy hits. The shaft of the motor bends easily, creating friction, and that's what burns them out. The motors and props are fully protected though to combat this, and they are very cheap to replace, but it's why we don't see them much anymore, along with them having less power than brushless motors. I used my Fat Shark HDO2 goggles with a rapid fire receiver and a Menace periscope antenna and a Bandicoot patch antenna to record the DVR, which performs much better than the receiver in the provided goggles. But because analog is analog, you can at least upgrade to better goggles with this package. And I have to say, out of all of the recent budget ready-to-fly packages that have been released, I had the most fun with this one. I think it's because it's such a cheap price. There's no anxiety when flying it around. You can fly it through tiny gaps with no problem. The prop protectors just bounce off stuff if you don't hit anything too hard. Being a brush model, it is for sure underpowered, so unless you have plenty of height, I'd stay away from trying to do flips and rolls in acro mode. But cruising in acro mode was so much fun. Analog cameras also do better in low light than budget HD systems, so I felt happy to push flying the model in darker scenarios. For the type of model this is, the Betaflight tune is completely fine. With small brush models, there's not a lot you can do in terms of improvement when it comes to the tune anyway. Emax has put in the manual that you should not modify any of the PID settings, and I would recommend the same. Emax has test pilots that test the tune of their models, and changing it might cause problems. Also, with this being a brushed model, it tend to find that the tune needs to be quite a bit different than a brushless model. So if you aren't used to tuning your models, it's definitely best to leave the tune alone. The on-screen display placement is fine, but as this is Betaflight, you can change it if you like. What I love about analog is that you don't have to worry about your video signal in the same way that you do with an HD video system. When you start getting really bad breakup, that's your warning to turn around. I've been so used to HD video systems where you're looking for an image stutter, or it starts to pixelate, or you are fixated on your megabits per second somewhere on the on-screen display. Analog is simple and it gives you the confidence to push things more. And with this package, I was reminded how good the range of analog can be, even with a fairly low-powered budget model like this. I was able to fly as far as I was willing to walk, which did put a big smile on my face, I have to say. You just have to remember, as a beginner, there's no lost model alarm with this. It can't even make the motors twitch to make a noise because brush motors just don't work like that. So if you lose the model in long grass, it will be difficult to find. With the Cadex Protos and the ArtLink based Beta FPV Aquila 2, it's difficult for me to recommend them because you'll be spending $350 plus on a ready-to-fly package that has little to no upgrade path. But I think with this one, for $180, you could learn to fly with it and not be too sore moving on to hobby grade stuff afterwards. I was easily able to convert the budget Emax transmitter to mode 1, something that I couldn't do with the Cadex and Beta FPV offerings. However, it should be said, just like those other ready-to-fly packages, the Emax E8 radio is not officially supported by Express LRS. So any firmware or updates that need to be done has to go through Emax. So it's not really a future-proof radio, but it is something that you can move on again because it doesn't matter as much with the price being as low as it is. I think the biggest downside of this package are the goggles. I really strained my eyes flying with them, and I mostly flew with my Fat Shark HDO2 goggles. However, when I first started off flying FPV, it was with models just like this. In fact, not as good as this. It was the Hubsan H107D, and I would use a screen to fly through them rather than goggles, and then you could move on to some better goggles such as the Eachine EV800D, for example. I think this is a good, cheap package to buy as a beginner, and I didn't think I'd be saying that about analog again after being spoiled by HD systems. But HD systems that are good are really expensive, and you are constantly worrying about crashing and losing your investment, and that is not the case with this. The flight time isn't too bad either. It's not quite as good as the Cadex Protos and the Beta FPV Aquila 2. I was getting around 5.5 minutes flying inside and 4.5 minutes flying outside, where I was using more power and it was much colder. So there you go, that is my review of the Emax Tiny Hawk Lite ready-to-fly package. I'll put a link in the video description if you wish to get one, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers!
Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Baseline from Happy Model. This is the Walksnail edition. Also comes with HD0, and of course, I previously reviewed the analog version. Link in the video description. Oh.
Alright, so this is the Mobula 6 2026, and in actuality, this is actually called the Mobula 6 2024 V3. It should have been called the 2026 version, because when this came out in 2024, the name seemed appropriate. And then they made a V2, a 2024 V2 in 2025, which was really weird. Not much change in that version. It got heavier. They basically put plugs on the flight controller for that version instead of soldered motors. And I think they made a change to the VTX, updated part there, but it was heavier. Not a lot of people reviewed that version that came out in 2025. And then now in 2026, we have this new version. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's not much different from the 2024 version. And performance is maybe a little bit less than the 2024 version that I reviewed. And I'll explain why in a second here. There's I think a defect in mine, and I'll explain that as well. But let me just go over what you get in this new 2024 V3. And I really hate the name. They really should have called this the 2026 version. But I think the reason they didn't call it the 2026 version is because it's not that much better than the 2024 version. So basically, it's an updated version of the 2024. Yeah, I know people that love Happy Model are gonna be like, "Hey, why are you bashing Happy Model?" And I think it's not. I think I'm a little disappointed. I know that this came out before the Air 65 2 Champions Edition, so I reviewed this first. I got this after I got this. I think most people got this before they got this, and so they had no kind of, the baseline is kind of skewed. And you know, if you're looking at what you should buy right now in February of 2026, and if you're looking for performance, there's really no doubt. I mean, the performance difference between this and the Beta FPV Champions is so different. This is so much better. Granted, do you need 36,000 kV motors? Probably not. I know there's people out there making custom builds out there with 40 and 50,000 kV motors, and you know, getting 30-second flight times for their drag races. I guess is tiny hook drag racing a thing? I don't know. You know, there's people out there that have those DIY custom builds. But anyway, I don't want to get too off topic. You can watch that video if you want. They didn't change a whole lot here. The frame is the same. This is the 2024 frame that I had before. As far as I can tell, there's no update to the frame. It's the same design, and it is quite a bit heavy. Let's just look at the weights here, just to give you a little bit of perspective on why the performance is not really up to par for what you're going to get in 2026. So this is the frame, 2.8 by 2.85 grams. That's the Mobula 6 2024 frame. And then this is the Nubidrone Light AF frame, 2.4 grams. And then this is the Champions Edition frame. And look how much lighter that is, 2.11 grams. It is significantly lighter. Again, look at the Happy Model frame, 2.85 versus 2.11. It's a night and day difference in terms of weight. Now, I know there's going to be people out there saying, hey, this is so much lighter, it's got to be less durable. I don't know. I mean, I've crashed this guy a lot, and it's held up. Also, the flexibility of the kind of plastic they use in the polycarbonate is really different. So this is a lot lighter, but it is significantly stiffer than the Happy Model frame. So this is same amount of force, look at how much more flex there is. It's super bendy. I'm not using very much force at all. This is reflected in the pitch tune as well, and also kind of limits what kind of motors you can put on it, props. And then this, for the same amount of force on this frame, yeah, it flexes a bit here as well, but it just feels overall stiffer, especially for side impacts. This is significantly stiffer, even though it's a lot lighter. And then this one has a lot more give for the same amount of force. Now, granted, even though this is a lot heavier, I haven't heard a lot of complaints about this frame breaking. Obviously, they've kept it for the last 2 years. This frame originally came out in March of 2024 is when they made their first video. So they've kept this frame around for 2 years and haven't updated the design, which means it's held up. Otherwise, if there were a lot of people complaining about this frame not holding up, they would have updated the frame. If they haven't updated the frame because it's a pretty weak design, let me know. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been that much noise regarding this specific frame. And just to show you the weight here, this is the V3. It's coming in at 17.6 grams, and I believe the V1 that I reviewed 2 years ago was 17.7 grams, so just a little bit lighter. And just for reference, this is the Champions. This is a 16.5 grams, so it's about a gram lighter overall. And just for reference here, this is not even one of my lightest builds, but this is a DIY ultralight build. I think I have another one that's like 14.1 grams, something like that. So you can definitely make lighter builds if you build one yourself. So the motors on here are the same spec-wise as what came out 2 years ago, the SE0702 28,000 kV. However, in flight, they feel not as powerful, even though this is a little bit lighter. Not really sure why that is. I have a feeling that these are actually not 28,000 kV, because I have these 0702s from Beta FPV that are 27,000 kV, and this is a little bit lighter, and I feel like I have a lot more power on this. This is a custom build versus these 28,000 kVs from Happy Model. But interestingly, on this Lava 2, this 280 milliamp hour Lava 2, I get over 4 minutes of flight time on this setup, which means that these are very likely something like 24,000 or 25,000 kV, because I can't get 4 minutes on this setup here, even though it's lighter with a lower kV motor, 27,000 kV. I can't get 4 minutes on this exactly. It's a little bit less, but this indicates that the motor kV on here is probably not accurate. It's more likely 24 or 25,000 kV, which also, it makes sense if you just take if I just take this setup here and I just put a motor output limit in here and artificially reduce the kV, I can get more flight time out of this one. So, if you have a really high kV motor, you don't like the flight time, you just put a motor output limit in there and you will get more flight time. They did fix the pigtail here that I complained about in my V1 video. They now have the 180 degree pigtail. I made a video on how to make this, and I simply just copied what I did in that video. And they have the same A30 connectors, which works with BT2.0 batteries. They changed the connector to this Beta FPV style GST connector, and they do have the cable for that. So here's the rest of the stuff that comes in the box. So they do have a similar cable. I think the Beta FPV one is the same plug in the same order, so it should work, and just USB-C on the side. You get a spare canopy, and this one is the same as far as I can tell. I don't think they've updated the design for the canopy. You get some spare screws, a prop removal tool, and these are the same ones that are installed, the 1219s from Jump Fan, and then you get a screwdriver. And they do include a spare set of these 31mm HQ props as well. But regarding the props, do note that they are also still making the prop really high, like they just barely stick it on. So I'm not sure if the camera will focus here, but you can see, it's a little hard to see from that angle, but yeah, here, you can kind of see it better here. where the top of the motor belt is and where the bottom of the prop is, there's that gap. I mean, I can stick my screwdriver in here completely. And that's not going to be good because when you crash, it's going to put some more leverage on the prop shaft and bend it. So I flew it as it came out of the box because it's tuned for this. And if you do press it all the way down to where it's flush, it does. If I remember right from my V1 video when I did that, it started oscillating, so we had to back the PIDs off a little bit. I'm not sure why they are doing like this because this is a durability concern for the motor shaft. So you really should try and push that prop all the way down, and it will pop out through the top here. And I think it's just for this specific gem fan prop. So if you try a different prop, maybe it'll fit better, and you'll have different results. You probably will need to adjust your PIDs. And again, they did update the flight controller. So before it was called the Super X, I believe, and now it's called the Crazy G473, I think. And they, again, they updated that plug. It does have the 5-in-1, so it has a built-in video transmitter. The UFO connector is buried back there, and then you have your 2.5 gigahertz Express LRS antenna. That is very, very similar to the Matrix 5-in-1 from Beta FPV. Like they almost copy the design completely. Although there's no plug here for the camera, the camera wires are soldered to the board, and they wrap around, and then they wrap around underneath the board over here. And they changed the camera in this version. It's a 1200 TV line camera. I think mine's defective. It is extremely bright or overexposed. If you compare, I'm flying the same place in my living room that I always fly all these tiny whoops. And so you can go back and look at my other videos. Look at the last video on the Champions Edition here. And you can see that camera. That's a CO3 camera from Beta FPV. I've been using that for years. It doesn't have that problem where the lights get completely blown out. I think this camera's tuned for super dark environments, so it's got very good low light performance. So maybe if you're flying in very low light, that this is going to be a benefit versus where you just fly anywhere near kind of. I just have like just ordinary lights. And even like the LED lights from the little things from the track I have that I'm flying around, those are the light is super overblown, and I had to turn my brightness in my goggles all the way to 0 just to fly. If I had it at a normal level, it was so overblown out that I couldn't really see any details. Everything was just super overexposed. I was looking at mostly white. So I think this camera is defective. Let me know. I know a lot of people have probably bought this already. If you have this already and if you have that problem, let me know in the comments if you've experienced that or not. Someone, my patron, did mention to me that they were having that issue as well, where it was overexposed, but they were able to get it a little bit more under control if they were using HT0 goggles. And I think the V2s, which are, I think with tariffs are over $1,000. So I guess if you want to fly this camera, maybe you need to buy a $1,200 FPV goggle. Kind of crazy. But all the other goggles that he used said that the video was super overexposed, like the problem I'm having. And I tried 3 different goggles, they were overexposed in all of them, the ones I've had. The previous camera that they had in the V1 I thought was significantly better. I didn't really notice much improvement in terms of resolution in this camera versus the old one. So I'm not really sure why they bothered to upgrade this camera, because I thought the previous one was just fine. So in a lot of ways, I think they have taken a step backwards in this model. The performance isn't as great. I think the KV of these motors are actually less than advertised. The flight time is great. If you're looking for flight time, I think you're going to get that with this model. So if you're okay with the camera being the way it is, and you're looking for ultimate flight time, then yeah, maybe this one's worth checking out. But you can always take like another Beta FPV model. If you're not getting enough flight time, just put a motor, I'll put them in there to reduce the KV. have the motor, and then you'll get more flight time. So you can always do that in beta flight settings. Don't necessarily have to buy a whole new model to do that, or you can just switch out the motors for much lower kV motors if you want more flight time. So yeah, that's where things stand on this one here for 2026. A bit of a disappointment in my opinion. If you're looking for performance, there's definitely better options from Beta Fury right now. But if you're a happy model loyalist and you just want to support them, then yeah, the frame is durable, flight times are pretty good. I'm not sure what kind of camera performance you're going to get, whether you're going to like that or not. For me, it was not good. I really struggled to fly with the overexposed footage or the overexposed video. So you can look at the camera footage here. The DVR that's actually recorded is actually better than what I could get out of my goggles. It's kind of weird. I'm not really sure how to explain that. It was more overexposed in my goggles. Even turning the brightness down to 0, it was more overexposed in the live video feed versus what the DVR recorded. So the DVR recording isn't as bad as what I was experiencing live. So keep that in mind. Even taking it outdoors, you'll see that when I try and point it into the sun, it is super overexposed, and again, much worse in my live feed versus what was recorded in the DVR. But the DVR, even the DVR, looks pretty bad in comparison to a lot of the other tiny whoop analog cameras that I've flown in the past. So I really don't think this camera is much of an improvement overall. But regardless, I will put a link in the description if you guys want to check it out. That'll do it for this video. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Alright, so I'm about to start a new build. This is the Deep Space Seeker 3.5, and I got the new 1505 motors from Deep Space as well. Custom build coming up on the channel later. This video is not necessarily about this build. I'll have a whole video later on that, but I just wanted to show you I just took everything out, and as usual, they got everything nicely labeled and very nice looking parts. Got some injection molded side pieces, and overall the frame looks super duper nice. This will be coming up on the channel a little bit later, but for this video I want to talk about tariffs, and I want to just specifically talk about my experience getting this frame. So I actually picked up the frame from Banggood, and I don't think that this is the current price as of the recording of this video, but I think I paid a little bit more than this. The prices have fluctuated since, but mainly the reason I got it from Bang is because I was looking at it over on Amazon. Obviously a lot more expensive here, and it wasn't actually, I think it went up since I last looked at this. It was like around $125, now it's went up to $130, almost $138. And what's interesting is I was like, oh, well, they must be paying a tariff on this because it's so expensive. But then, like, they don't even have it in the US here. It looks like delivery in maybe about 2 weeks from now, February 13th to March 2nd, so 2 to 4 weeks from now. So it looks like they're still sending it from China, and I'm not sure why it's so expensive. And this is kind of the thing with tariffs. It's all over the map. It's very inconsistent. So I do want to put a disclaimer out here that I'm giving you my specific experience on this exact purchase. I have bought stuff from Banggood previously, and they did come with some tariffs that they weren't too bad. And I picked up some motors and some receivers, so it wasn't like a huge. It was less than $100 like total, but I wanted to pick up this frame, and it was a lot cheaper from Banggood than on Amazon. I was like, well, I guess I'll just pay a tariff on it. And when it came, I didn't have to pay a tariff this time for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Things change all the time, and I think what's going on is what they're doing is what AliExpress has been doing, and I didn't check AliExpress when I went to go look for this frame, but they do have that as well over at AliExpress. Now this is the cheapest one I found on AliExpress. There's other listings that cost more. Similar price here. And what AliExpress has been doing is if you buy from them, you'll see it says import charges included. So when you buy it, and I think this is free shipping, so you just pay that plus tax, and you don't pay any tariffs because the import charges are included in that price. So they're being sort of transparent about like what's included in the price. Some stores won't have that. So if you don't see that import charges included, that means that you're probably going to have to pay a tariff, possibly. And I think what they're doing, and I think what Banggood is doing here, is kind of clever. I think what's going on is they have like probably a subset of inventory based on like what they think is going to sell, and they send a bunch of stuff over to and probably store it in a U.S. warehouse somewhere, and pay a bulk tariff for like the entire thing instead of shipping individual items and then having the customer pay for each individual tariff, because then each time you do that there's a processing fee from the shipper, so UPS, DHL, FedEx. They charge a base fee. It can vary, it depends on what you're buying, but it could be anywhere from $15 as a flat processing fee up to $500. Really depends on what you're getting. So I think they're eliminating that part of the tariff, the processing fee, by bulk shipping a bunch of stuff, and then when you order something, it comes out of that stuff that was bulk shipped because they paid a bulk tariff, and I think the price is now including that tariff. Now, I may be completely wrong with this, so if you happen to know more information about this, let me know in the comments. Let me know what your experiences have been in terms of buying stuff from Banggood and AliExpress. I think on AliExpress it's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more transparent, because I have bought plenty of stuff on AliExpress where it does say the import charges are included, and when I get it, I don't pay any import charges. The stuff I bought from Banggood was last year, it was a few months ago. The prices were different, everything was different back then, but I did have to pay a tariff on those things, and it didn't say anything about import charges. But on this particular one, even though they still don't tell you if there's import charges or not, this particular one didn't have to. Now, I think that the reason they're not being transparent here is because they just don't know. It kind of depends on the product and whether or not they actually have sent it over already, or they're expecting it to be sent over at some point. So again, I think your mileage may vary. Your experience is probably going to be different from mine, but I just wanted to share what my experience has been for this specific purchase, because there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, FUD out there, a lot of misinformation. So I just wanted to share my specific experience with getting this frame on Banggood, and also some of my other experiences buying things from AliExpress. Now, obviously, you can buy this frame, I think, from GetFPV, and I think last time I checked this frame was around $90. I think it was $89 on GetFPV for the frame. So it's significantly cheaper if you get it from Banggood or AliExpress. But again, there's the risk of the tariff and also a lot of the unknowns. So you may, again, your experience may or may not line up with mine. It may be the same, or it might be worse. So I just wanted to share. And again, if you have your experiences, let me know in the comments.